All right. So looks like everything's working. Hold on real quick. Let me mute that because that always happens. Okay. All right. Perfect. All right. So we're going live a little early today, but that's okay. We're excited to jump in and start having our conversation about overcoming burnout. So I am super honored to have a newfound friend of mine joining our live today. Her name is Shawna, and we were connected because she is an expert at burnout. And I am just so excited to kind of round out our burnout discussion for this month with some of her insights and expertise, and just kind of wrapping up all of the questions that you guys have submitted. So, we are going to jump in and answer those questions that you've submitted. If you are joining us for the live, I am also going to be paying attention to the chat box there. So, feel free to hop in with any of your thoughts, ideas, or any additional questions that you have. And I'm just going to start here so that you know, because I know we're going to have an amazing conversation today. And if you are not already connected with Shawna, you're going to want to be after this conversation. And the best place to find her is right here on LinkedIn. So when you're done tuning in, please make sure that you join her. So, Shawna, thank you so much for jumping in with me today and for being a part of this conversation.
Thank you, Amy. I'm excited to dig deeper into these questions, and I think that it's going to be a really informative session.
Yes, we are going to have a ton of fun. So, all right, so we're going to jump in actually with a question that was submitted on LinkedIn. And let me pull that up. So I'm going to be toggling back and forth. So be patient with me while I go back and forth. So this one is specifically addressing leaders. And that I feel like could apply to a lot of different people. Maybe it's a leadership position and you manage a team. Maybe you're a leader in your business, and you have clients that you manage, or a team at your own company that you manage as well. So, really talking to our leaders here, how would you advise supporting and training a strong team, which, of course, I'm going to add this in, is always amazing because if you have a really great team and you're able to delegate so that you guys can kind of spread that load, that's going to help everybody with a burnout, struggle, right? So when it comes to supporting and training that team, how do you do that while also maintaining your own workload and being present with your family? So that's kind of the trifecta there. Do you have any recommendations or ideas for this person?
So, first off, I want to offer to make sure that you're throwing yourself into the mix and your own well-being. So, you've got to make sure that you're taking care of yourself first and foremost. And so, what I would offer in this situation is that I love definitions. And I think
Mm,
often we start looking at, supporting and training our team, ensuring our workload's taking care of family needs. But what does that look like? Like, let's identify, let's, really charter out what support looks like for your team. What
mm,
type of training do you want to offer to your team? As you mentioned, there may be team members that require more training than others or more support than others. So having really a clear idea of what that all means will clarify and give you direction in your brain as
mm.
to where to focus on, and then taking that information and making sure that you're time blocking it, prioritizing it in that way allows you to be able to manage your to-dos
Mhm.
and also your schedule. So there's a match there.
Right. Okay. I like that idea because giving it that definition is going to automatically give it that clarity. So then when you're making decisions about whether or not to do this or schedule that or have this happen or whatever, it's a little bit easier to see if it fits into the definition of what you were actually trying to create in the first place. I like that
Yeah.
a lot. Yeah.
And I think that, if you don't do that, things
Mhm.
are going to fall off naturally.
Right.
So isn't it better to be intentional on the things that you want to ensure that is important to you gets done? So I think that's
Right.
a really good way of reframing it so that it does direct you to that prioritization exercise.
Right, right. I joke all the time, and I talk about this all the time, where I feel like all we do is put out fires. Right? And I'm pretty
Mhm.
sure that's not part of any of those definitions of what you want to be doing. It's just chasing chickens and putting out fires, right? So, starting at that foundational level of having that definition, it really does just kind of help. Like, does it go in the bucket or does it not go in the bucket? And then I imagine that probably also helps with your own decision fatigue, because you're not having to then in the moment try to decide if this is something that you need to tackle or something else you need to add on your list because you've already got those definitions. It's really clear whether or not it goes here or here. And then it's a whole lot easier to make that decision. Let me ask you this as just kind of a follow up. Do you find that in having those definitions, and I'm asking this for a reason because I hear this all the time from my clients and my followers, in having those definitions, do you think it would have an impact on feeling guilty, especially if you had to make the decision that, like, I'm not going to do that thing? Do you think it would make you feel a little less guilty in choosing not to do that?
I think that when you're intentional, you do make your decisions based on the information
Mm,
that you have available at the time.
mm-hmm,
And, being guilty or having regret is, second guessing the decisions that you made previously. So that is a
ooh,
really good point is when you do put something on your schedule, stick by it, honor your decision that you've made, honor your past self
right.
that you've trusted yourself to make that decision at that time with the information that you have, but at the same time recognizing that you have flexibility. If something urgent comes up, that you allow that grace to yourself and say, I am changing this
Mm-hmm,
schedule because
mm-hmm,
this is more important at this time. So I think
right.
that's how you manage that guilt.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. I've never thought about that perspective before, which is exactly why I bring people on because there's so many layers to so many of these conversations. And I love that. Like, we do need to be flexible, especially in a leadership or entrepreneurial position. We've got to be able to adapt, but we also don't have to be shifting with the winds every time somebody else wants our attention. So it gives us a structure to create our own flexibility within. Yeah, that's beautiful. Okay. I'm going to take a little bit away from that myself. I like it. Okay. Um, so I really loved this question, and I have been asked a lot about the signs of burnout, some of the early signs of burnout, even. And I discussed that a couple of weeks ago when we first started this discussion of what that looks like. And this person is kind of looking for a little bit of that, but almost from a different angle on so she asked, how do I know if I'm experiencing burnout or if I'm just in a short-term season of stress? And I think that's so smart to try and distinguish between the two of them, right? Because our lives are never going to be just this every day all the time. We're going to have, busier seasons, or maybe our child gets sick. And so today was supposed to be really easy, but now we're trying to manage our job and our kid. So, how do we know when we're really looking at burnout in a big way versus just like, I'm going through a season right now that's stressful?
Well, I think that in our society, we tend to be very hard on ourselves when we are feeling, I'll just say, quote unquote, negative emotions. So
Mm,
things that we,
sure.
don't necessarily want to feel. And stress
Hmm.
is one of them. And I think that what happens is that we have this tendency to feel like we should be happy all the time. That, if we're not feeling happy, well, something's wrong. We're broken to fix something,
Right.
right? I like to bring it back to we're all human beings having the
Mm,
human experience. And so the whole gamut of emotions are available. So
right.
now going back to the question about, okay, if I'm in a short-term stress, is what is it creating in your life right now? How is it showing up in your life?
Mm,
Burnout is the result of these physical symptoms that have manifested as a result of constant cumulative um,
mhm.
periods of stress. And
Hmm.
so I think that that's a way to kind of distinguish it. What does it look like in your life right now? And
Hmm.
if you are feeling right now that you're going through a period of stress, what
Hmm.
are the things that you're doing to manage that stress? How are you
Right.
taking care of yourself during this period? Because if you're not taking care of yourself during that period, then there's the possibility that it leads to burnout.
Right. So this may even be the precursor or step one if you're not managing it well to even getting to that point that you're actually experiencing burnout, right? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, one thing that I thought of as well in reading this question was having those check-ins with yourself or an accountability partner or a coach or whomever that may be, right? And I know this is right in line with your work and exactly what you do, where, okay, like maybe it's a little bit stressful. So let's do a check-in in a week or when that project at work is done or whatever that may be that you feel like maybe adding to that stressful season for that moment. And then checking in and saying, okay, how do I feel now that what I was attributing that stress to, if it's gone or reduced or paused, how am I feeling now? And that can be a really good indication on how far down that road you are. And we have a question that's coming up in a little bit, and I want to be clear that we're not medical doctors or medical professionals, and this in no way replaces that conversation that you should have with your doctor or your, healthcare provider, mental health specialist. But, I went through a cancer diagnosis back in 2020, and looking and reflecting back on it, I see so many things that were on my plate at one time, and I felt like I was doing a really great job at like keeping everything, all the balls in the air at the same time and all the plates spinning. And, I was managing a lot. I was a few months into a second marriage and had two teenage stepdaughters that were coming into my world, and I was coming into theirs, and a whole host of other things that it does make me wonder in hindsight, especially learning and knowing more about the things that I know about now, like how much maybe did that influence what ended up happening to me? Not saying that there's a direct correlation or causation, even, but was my body struggling so hard to even just do normal day to day things for months on end that something like that had the, perfect storm to be able to continue to manifest or grow, right? So I don't know how all of that works, and I'm not a medical doctor, but it does make me a little bit more aware of that stress and how it relates to our physical bodies and how it's going to show up if we're not, or potentially show up if we're not managing it well and if it's not being handled in the right way. So I think that's a beautiful thing to consider, is that physical manifestation of what's going on when you're going through all of that stress. Thank you for that.
Right.
Okay. So this person said, and I love this. And the reason that I love this is because I feel like I was this person. I feel like it was me. And sometimes maybe even still is my tendency and the way that I go if I don't pay attention and if I'm not really on top of things. So this was a lady. She said, I like to work. I like doing everything at home, right? She loves all those things, all the things about running a home. But I am in my happy place when I'm working. And I think she means professionally and personally here, right? I hear about burnout all the time and it pisses me off. What about those of us who just like to work? And she put like in all caps. So I definitely used to be her, and I would love to hear what you have to say about this.
Well, and again, I think I'll go back to it all depends on what you're creating in your life. If work is providing you with fulfillment and
Mm,
enrichment and just enough challenge and passion, and your home life is that as well, then you're creating that life that you want to live. Where it gets a little tricky is when you love work but
mhm,
at the same time, maybe you're using work in a way as a coping mechanism, for example.
mm,
Maybe there's conflict at home that you're trying to avoid. Maybe there's something else that's going on that you're using work as a distraction. So even though it's a good thing that you enjoy work, are you really dealing or managing with the other
Mm-hmm.
things that you have in your life. And
Mm-hmm.
it's just about being really self-aware
Right.
and, understanding what it's creating in your life for you.
Yeah, I think we are the best liars to ourselves, right? We create some incredible stories and we are really good at believing them, right?
Right.
Like, and I know for me for a long time, I really did enjoy work, and it wasn't for me, I wasn't avoiding anything at home or trying to do any of those things. But for me, when I made statements like this, it was because that was my identity. I found a lot of my identity in being at work and being a high achiever at work. I loved it when, I was able to contribute even more and do even more because that kind of fed some type of validation of who I was, right? And as those things slowly started to fall to the wayside, it was like, oh, it wasn't. I mean, I enjoyed my job when I used to be an assistant principal and all those things. They did bring me joy, but it wasn't that I just thought it was the greatest thing since sliced bread. It was that I felt like this was who I am as a person, and sometimes pulling those layers back can be really interesting. So let's say that someone is really relating to this question, and this just feels like 100% them. What do you recommend on how to maybe maybe they feel like they're self-aware but could use like a check, from someone else? How do you recommend people kind of figure out what their true motivation is there, and how do we know for sure that we're being honest with ourselves there?
Well, I'm so glad you mentioned the identity portion because it's so true.
Mm,
We are socialized with our identity from wherever that comes from, family, friends, like work, etc. And so I think that we will do everything it takes to maintain that identity
right.
because we are valuing it as who we are and taking it away. Well, what does that mean for us? We
Hmm.
feel a little bit lost if
Hmm.
our identity is taken away. So that is such a good point. I think that my advice would be is, taking a look at uh, all of your like the whole
Hmm.
gamut of your life, and are you enjoying all the other parts of your life as well? Are Is there room for creativity? Is there room for passion projects, for example? What brings you joy,
Hmm.
and and are you making the time to do that? And so I
Yeah.
think that that's really important to keep in mind.
Yeah, yeah, that's beautiful. I talk all the time about how work-life balance is not a real thing, and I hate it, and I wish we could do away with that phrase. And you hit right on that, right? There's so much to us, so much more than just like work and home. There's creativity and passion projects and all the other things that make us who we are that are outside of that work. Yeah, nail on the head. I love that. I love that. Okay. So, this is the medical kind of related question that I kind of already pre-answered a little from my perspective here, but again, we are not medical professionals. But this person said, and I honestly heard statements like this when I was going through my cancer journey, that she said, my friend said that stress causes cancer and a lot of other illnesses. Is that really true? So again, we can't say definitively or with, any kind of medical authority in any way, but speaking of how that stress does affect our physical bodies that you mentioned earlier, what does that look like? Could it cause, something like a more chronic illness? My background is in biology, so of course, if you have the flu, it's because you have the flu virus, but how might stress or burnout play a role in you getting sick from that? What would you like to add to that?
Well, I think that, the symptoms of burnout, the fatigue, the exhaustion, and what causes that, the lack of sleep, for example, maybe not eating properly, etc., are things that may affect your immune system, and
Hmm.
therefore you're at a depleted nervous system where you're more susceptible for different illnesses, which may be, we're all different. So
Right.
receive things differently as well. So it could contribute. And again, as you mentioned, we're not medical practitioners, so we
Right.
can't comment. We're just giving our viewpoint.
Sure.
But I also want to mention the fact that some of the things that we do as coping mechanisms for stress. So, for example, if we're coping with stress by smoking, by
Mm,
overeating, those are the things that are also detrimental to our body, which could lead to other illnesses as well. So I think it's
right.
twofold, right? It's
Yeah.
either, the actual symptoms of the burnout itself
Hmm.
or things that we're doing in order to combat the stress that we're feeling.
Right. Right. That's an interesting point, actually, because there's a side of the coin that is managing the burnout, being aware of your schedule, how much you add to your plate, how you handle what gets thrown at you, and all of that, but also how you're coping with what you are dealing with, whatever stressors are still there at the end of the day. There's a prevention of trying to keep burnout from happening in the first place, but also if you're under stress, how are you managing that stress? Because it can snowball and compound on itself so that while, maybe I didn't add too much to my plate time wise or schedule wise, but I allowed, my coworkers' comments to really get to me, and I didn't process that emotion well, or I allowed fear of my next evaluation from my boss to drive me bonkers for 3 weeks. I've worked with people like that in the past before who like were, I mean, just absolute chicken little over what their annual evaluation was going to be, right? And are they going home and having a pint of ice cream every day to manage that fear and that stress? So, yeah, um, maybe directly, indirectly on the front end or on the back end, but I imagine it all does play a role and have something to do with it. Okay. All right. So, our last question, and we've talked a lot about this. I love how this actually progressed. This was not intentional, but I love how this progressed. So, this person asked, is burnout mental or physical? So, we've talked about a lot of the physical signs, symptoms, manifestations, but maybe we can talk a little bit about the mental burnout and if that really is the thing. So, they said, because I feel overwhelmed mentally, but honestly, it's not like I'm sick or tired or anything else when I hear other people talk about burnout. So, what about mental burnout?
Yeah, and I think that so kind of going back to definitions, and I try to simplify things as much as possible.
Yeah.
So when I look at stress, from what I understand, it is a real or perceived threat. So it's your body's response of a real or perceived threat.
Okay. Okay.
So when we look at that are going around us, sometimes we are blaming the situation around us, the environment around us, the people around us, and it's not those things around us. It's actually our interpretation of what's happening. It's how we're
Mm,
interacting with our world around us. And
okay.
so mental fatigue, overwhelm is is how is your brain processing the information that is coming to you, right? So,
Mm,
and if you don't feel stressed as a result, then you're processing the information that is coming to you. Your body's not physically producing that type of response, but at the same time, again, it becomes an exercise of self-awareness. It's like,
right.
okay, is this sustainable? Are you in a position where this is how you're interpreting what the
Mm,
world around you on a regular basis in that way? So
mm,
that's where the mental fatigue comes in. A lot of the individuals that I speak with, it's indecision, it's confusion, it's
right.
dread, it's fear, like all of these that come into play that may cause the overwhelm. And it's how are you managing it? Is there a different way of interpreting it? Is there a different way to perceive what's going on around you?
Right. Right. I love that question. Is it sustainable?
Mhm.
I think you blew my mind because I am someone that people tell me all the time, like, I don't know how you get it all done. I don't know how you do it all. I actually had one of my teachers when I was an assistant principal. She said, "You have the same 24 hours in a day that I do. How do you do it?" And, of course, again, at the time, because that was partly my identity, I was like, "Oh, yeah, I do." I took it as a compliment. And now I'm like, "Oh my gosh," because is it sustainable? Right?
Mhm.
Not can I do it or should I do it? Because a lot of us live under the shoulds, right? But is it sustainable? And even beyond that, is it sustainable in the type of life that you want to create? Is it sustainable in the life you want to live? Is it sustainable? I would say, like, as an example to my child, right? Like, do I want to show him this is how you're going to grow up and be because this is what it's supposed to look like? Like, yeah, just even thinking about that pattern of behavior, those things that we're making a routine for ourselves on how much we do and how much we take on long term, thinking ahead, is this sustainable? Gosh, I
Yeah, and I think it's all often we have this all or nothing thinking as well. Like it's
love it.
either we're
Yes,
busy, we're doing, accomplishing, we're producing, or we're doing nothing and
yes.
sitting on the
Right.
couch eating Netflix, right? So
Yes,
there is, there's a continuum there. There is so many
yes,
options in between. And there are often individuals that you see get so much done, but they're
right,
so calm. They're very
right.
much in control. So again, it's, I think it's a balance or integration. I like that word,
Absolutely.
integration,
Yeah.
the way how we integrate all parts of our life,
Hmm.
and ensuring that we know what our priorities are, what's important to us. We fit that in a sustainable way,
Right.
and that leaves us the feeling of calm because we've got everything covered that we want to get done.
Right, right. Absolutely. Absolutely. That entire picture of what it looks like. And I talk a lot about balance in my work. And I think a lot of us have this concept that we have to balance like hour for hour in our day. And that's just, it's impossible, right? But sometimes it might be balancing this day with tomorrow or this month with next month or whatever that may look like at the time, right? Like tomorrow, my schedule is slam packed full. I mean, I don't have a break. But today, had a little bit more flexibility, a little bit more time. And instead of filling it with tasks and to-dos and things like that, my son had a play date. He starts school on Monday, so he's home this week, but he had a little play date. They swam. I hung out with a friend for a little bit before we hopped onto this because I can create that balance and I'm looking at the big picture as it's happening as well. So all of those pieces get thrown into the mix. So yeah, I love
That's so
that.
good.
Yes,
So good. And
Shauna, thank you
as
so much.
as overachievers, I think we try to pack as much in, even when
Yes,
there's like free time, we'll say, oh, we can get XYZ done. And
yes.
so such a great awareness
Yes.
that you had just to take a step back and
Hmm.
enjoy that time. Because one
Hmm.
thing I want to offer as well is sometimes we think we have to deserve rest before
Oh my
we can
gosh.
rest.
Yes.
And we don't need to deserve it. We're all worthy of
Yep.
rest,
Yep.
and we
Yep.
don't have to wait until something else is done.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. When my husband and I were dating, I went on a trip to Bali for 2 weeks. And I was by myself for part of the trip, and then my best friend joined me, and he sent me a WhatsApp message, and he said, "I'm so glad you're doing this. You deserve it." And
Oh,
I tell you what, this was when I was still an assistant principal and working like a gajillion hours a week. And the visceral response that I had to that message was like, screw you. It was actually other things that I'm not going to say on the live. And actually helped me realize, right? That like I didn't need to kill myself to come and do this trip. I didn't need to like drown in work for weeks to be able to say I'm going on vacation. Like I deserve to be able to be on this trip because like I'm a human and I exist on this planet. So therefore I deserve it, right? Like
yeah.
And I think I probably didn't handle that conversation with him really well at the time, not even going to lie about that. But he hasn't said it to me since, and he does understand my thoughts on that, but it was really great to be able to have that experience where someone told me that, and it was just like, oh, that felt so wrong, in my body that now when we have conversations like this, it absolutely is just that you deserve it, and I also want to throw out that just a moment ago you said that we feel like we have to be black and white, right? So you're either a gajillion hours at work or you're 2 weeks in Bali and near the twain shall meet. And it's really funny. My maiden name is actually Gray. And I remember a therapist when I was like 24 years old, and he said, Amy, now I had gotten married at this time, so he did not know my maiden name. And he said, Amy, he said, you are just so black and white. You need more gray. It's like, you don't even know the irony of the statement you just made, but he saw that though, Shawna, right? Like he saw that in me that I couldn't see in me for years to come, that it was either in this camp or this camp, and it doesn't have to be that way. There is an integration, I love that word, and a balance between how we're living our work lives, our home lives, our personal lives, our own self lives, the things that we do that are just for us that so many of us neglect. So, thank you so much for all of your thoughts and ideas. I have a lot to ruminate on, and I'm sure everybody else does as well. So, if you're watching on LinkedIn right now, I saw a few of you pop in. The recording is going to be here, and Shauna and I will both be sharing it afterwards as well on our social channels and on LinkedIn. And again, a reminder, if you have not added Shauna yet, please go add her on LinkedIn. And I didn't mention this to begin with because I didn't want to stress anyone out, but she actually joined us when there's like stupid bad weather in her state and maybe even a tornado warning. So I'm so glad we made it through this. You were absolutely incredible. And I can't thank you enough for adding your thoughts into this conversation.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It was such a great conversation, and I'm looking forward to many more.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Shauna. Everybody, y'all have a good one and we'll talk soon. Bye.